Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals. And Dan, I don't know if I told you, I'm like 8 issues away of owning all of Spectacular Spider-Man, but not the annuals for Spectacular Spider-Man because those don't count. And the annuals for Amazing Spider-Man don't count. Annuals don't count. That's the bottom line.
Well, I will say that in response to you, I am Dapper Dan Gavosden, the Dapper one, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, and I own every issue of Spectacular Spider-Man across multiple volumes, and all of those annuals as well, which, look, I'm not going to die on the hill of defending the Spectacular annuals, but the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, I will die on that hill. They definitely count. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy.
I mean, maybe if you didn't buy all those Spectacular books, Dan, you could have bought Amazing Fantasy 15. I mean, you know.
Well, I also own all of the Web of books and all of those annuals and all the Spider-Man books and all of those annuals. And you're making a solid point that is becoming more and more true in my mind as I talk.
And we can see all those books behind you in your man cave right now. Dan is organizing, which is, you know, for the benefits of those on video. Anyway, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for the 8 Deaths of Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. Those reviews are important as they're the best way to spread the word about the show and indicate the size of our audience to guests and collaborators. And a special thank you to everybody who's done that, taken that advice. We've got a whole new series of reviews that came in, and we really appreciate your support of our show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes and exclusive artwork and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. On the Patreon, we've already kicked off Season 7 of the Amazing Spider Talk, covering the first half of the David Michelinie run and much more. So if you want to join our conversation about that era of Spider-Man, consider joining the Patreon.
Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 64. It's the 4th part of the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man mini-series, interlude between runs. The Joe Kelly is continuing on after it. It's official. And we're going to be reading that too. But for now, we are in the middle of this interlude. This issue was written by Justina Ireland. The cover features artwork by Ed McGuinness and Marcio Menyz. The interior pages feature artwork by Gleb Melnikov, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on December 25th, 2024, Christmas Day. Although it's important to note that many shops were hit with more delays by Diamond, which probably wasn't helped by the Christmas Day being the release date on this book. So I imagine many people received their books quite late, as I did. But it's in my hands now, and Mark, you and I are reviewing it. We praised Justina Ireland and her writing on the last issue, saying that she was a really solid, you know, classical-styled Amazing Spider-Man writer. What'd you think of her work in this issue? Is it comparable to stuff that we might have seen more in?
I mean, maybe Spider-Verse more? No, I mean, like, I think it's a notch above that. These Justina Ireland issues, as we discussed last episode, these are a stronger take on Peter as a character and kind of the stakes of what's going on. I really like that we are, I don't even say just inside Peter's head, because I feel like Joe Kelly is inside Peter's head, but it's still that schizophrenic, you know, ADD-addled Peter head when it's Joe Kelly writing it, whereas Justina, it's a little more of a layman's approach to Peter, maybe. I mean, like, I think that's what, you know, I hate to say that we're grading on a curve here, but, like, we're just getting some bread and butter Spider-Man stories here. And the fact that, like, she is borrowing from a story like Coming Home and, you know, using, like, you know, Calyx attacking random passerbys similar to how Moreland was doing it to kind of draw Peter out and prey on his weaknesses. I mean, you know, I don't bring up that comparison to mean like it's of the same quality, but I think it's good that Ireland is looking at those stories and be like, hey, these are core elements of this character. I should use them rather than have him quote Scott Pilgrim. So, in that regard, it's really good.
Yeah, bread and butter is the right way to put this, but even that I think kind of undersells it a little bit. I don't think these are kind of like genre defining or redefining or like Spider-Man busting stories that show us something truly new about the character. But what I have really admired about her writing so far is just the balance of it all. You've got plenty of Peter's life in ways that feel substantial and meaningful. Maybe not shaking everything up, but it feels like a lived-in character. He's going to set up his art display with Randy. He's checking in with, the various people in his life, and those people are getting together without him. Think about this: how little we've seen Aunt May, and this book took time to show us Aunt May without Peter in the scene. It's almost unbelievable, Mark. That there's this much page space devoted to things that are almost of so little consequence to what we had seen in the past. But also that we see Peter do something clever with science and in this issue. He makes a really solid joke with the Pokemon reference that I actually got this time, despite me liking Scott Pilgrim more than Pokemon. The monologue from Peter is throughout this book. It doesn't stop, and it's always good. And Peter, we balance some stuff about him saving civilians and him being proactive in his thing and character growth that he executes throughout. I just think there's so much in here. It's not showy, but it's classic Amazing Spider-Man. The reason we used to show up for this book, it's just simple elements. And the biggest thing is, as opposed to the Joe Kelly issues, where I feel like you could swap any hero into that story and it would fit in, this feels very Spider-Man to me. Everything about it is Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and I really don't think it could be anybody else's story.
I mean, I agree with that, but I guess where I'm kind of pushing back a little bit on this here is I don't feel like this should be the norm for the book. And just because it's not with what we've gotten both with Joe Kelly and frankly with aspects of the Zeb Wells run doesn't necessarily mean that what we're getting here is elevated. I said bread and butter, and I stand by it because bread and butter is delicious.
I agree. The butter helps a lot. Yeah.
But man can't live on bread alone. You know what I mean? And there is still something I think holistically kind of missing from this run. Yes, oh hey, it's Aunt May. We also haven't seen Jonah at all in this run, or Robbie in this run, or we have I made that joke in the recap about our contractual obligations. I mean, it's really outside of the Norman cameo in 2 issues ago. It's been it's been that triangle of characters, and it's must not deviate from how Peter's is affecting those 3, as if those are the only 3 people in his orbit. I mean, we haven't seen MJ or Paul. Not saying we necessarily want to, because then we'll probably get talk about loving people like sisters again. But at the same time, it's good and it's tasty. I don't know if we should be putting this on a pedestal because it's basically doing what a Spider-Man comic should be doing, which is focusing on Peter, being character driven, defining the stakes from his perspective in a way that makes sense to him. I mean, I'm very thankful that these last 2 issues he's really talked about I don't want to die anymore, and you would maybe hope that Joe Kelly would get to that point himself, but maybe not. I don't know, but I appreciate that Ireland's doing that, but like I said, that's something that we should be doing anyway with this character in this circumstance. In other words, why else are we telling this as a Spider-Man story if we're not going to do these things? I guess that's my point.
Well, don't let me convince you that this is an A+ book.
No, I know.
I'm not making that argument, but I do think we've watched professional writer after professional writer strike out at doing these simple things, which tells me that there is some reason that it's not happening. It could just be simple disinterest, right? In doing this, that someone new could come in and just go, well, I'm going to do it. And that's all it took, yes, we aren't getting Jonah and seeing the full spectrum, but in many ways, maybe it is that paring down and choosing to focus on a couple of things that allows it to fit within the page, structure or length of this book. I wouldn't fault JMS for not including any of those characters. He chose to just focus on MJ and May and Peter, and that was his entire thing. And it created beautiful stories because it didn't feel the need to bring in, every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Again, I'm not elevating this to that level, but I think it picks and chooses its battles and makes the ones that we get meaningful. And especially with Peter, I wasn't expecting, especially after the first 2 chapters of this, to see much growth from Peter, much less recognize the character. But seeing the moment that really made me really excited about this title was the moment of him deciding to trick this scion by calling out his spells and pulling a switcheroo on him, which means he's learning, then he's using that to his advantage, and he's tricking the reader as well if we're not paying attention or we aren't realizing that he's referencing Pokemon. I didn't recognize it because I have so given up on Peter learning lessons in this comic, and I thought that was just a Joe Kelly throwaway joke that was being repeated, but it was, whether by design or Justina going, I see an opportunity to do something with this. I thought that was really clever and made me actually invested in this. We're going to get some good Peter moments in here.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, I guess my other point that I have to kind of, deliberate on a little bit here, and, this is not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but we have seen this comic able to tell stories like this in 3-4 issue spurts before, and then something just seems to pull the rug out from underneath the narrative.
Oh, sure.
And I mean, that could just be as simple as Joe Kelly's returning in an issue, and that could be the rug right there. Or maybe this is all part of a larger plot that he has developed and has Justina Ireland in to help him with, and Joe Kelly will continue it, and he'll have we'll have a conversation in 2 weeks where we're like, man, this is the best issue Joe Kelly has written in years on this book, and then 2 weeks after that, it's like, well, we're back at this again. You know what I mean? So, and I'm not saying that you have to, obviously we're an issue by issue podcast. We are judging this by the one merits, but I think it's just something that's kind of tamping my overall enthusiasm. I recognize that these are good elements to a Spider-Man story. I do think that these are good elements that we are seeing being kind of borrowed from other stories, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I'd rather see creators play the hits, if you will, in terms of Spider-Man and tell a good story, even if it's not necessarily an all-timer, but then go so far off the reservation that it renders the story and the character unrecognizable. I mean, there's a difference between taking chances or just kind of going really out there with what you're trying to do. And I think, if anything, those first 2 issues of this run were just so out there for a Spider-Man story. We were just like, oh God, no. So the fact that we're getting something very familiar, that bread and butter again, I think is satisfying and allowing us to really embrace what we got here.
And I'll add to that. I want to say, granted, it's hard to tell the difference between something that is so off the reservation with the character and something that does something new that audiences didn't know they wanted. Like, you know, Superior Spider-Man, if you describe it to anyone, and I remember your reaction at the time was like, oh my God, they're going to break this character,
Right.
you know, and lo and behold, it ended up being the thing that got us to start this podcast,
Right.
if that's the only merit you want to pin on it. I thought it was a good book
Right.
too. Yeah, I you know, and so like I want to extend them the courtesy that like, you know, like you never know what's going to work and what's not going to work, and from anybody's perspective, something could or could not work, and people will disagree with our thoughts, and so on and so forth. The one thing about issue to issue for this, and I wouldn't blame this on anyone necessarily, that is kind of taking me out of it is the repeated structure of these stories. They're all very similar. Like I know each one I'm going to open up, and it's going to show Peter fighting against a different scion and I guess ultimately winning. You know, we've got 4 issues in a row that are very similar in that aspect. What made this one work for me, or at least suggest to me that they know that it's time to shake up that formula, is having Peter go on the offensive here, which I quite liked. You know, one, it gives Peter some power, and it suggests that he's not the patsy that like he's so often been written as. He's going to go and take it to these guys because he just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And I think that's cool, even if I find the kind of motivation of it kind of silly, like if only because the idea of him dying seems so underbaked. Like we've not really seen him go through that pain other than really in like maybe the first and maybe second issue. And the rules seem so wishy-washy on that it's like, and I think this issue kind of doubles down, and it's like, yeah, the rules are whatever you want them to be. Peter can challenge the Scion. But I like that, and I suspect the next issue, given the power set of Syra being the inevitability of death, is probably going to shake up the format or what goes on with Peter. I mean, it is a contest of champions, if you will. You know, it's going to proceed in certain order. But I'm ready for this kind of like one at a time. Peter dreads them, fights them, and goes back on with his life to kind of get a big shakeup.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a math major, but you know, we are this arc is what, 10 issues we've been told.
Yeah, it's 10
and
issues
it's 8
long,
deaths. Yeah. So, you know, I figured we were going to have to break the format eventually. Right. Otherwise it's going to be weird what happens in 2 issues to go, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then again, you never know what the Spider-Off is, or maybe they lost count. Oops. But
it wouldn't be the first time.
I know. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I agree. With that said, like, yeah, there still is like that, you know, it's, and hey, look, almost every issue of a superhero comic book is kind of like, here's the villain du jour.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it would be nice to kind of, you know, maybe one fight can take 2 issues, or you know what I mean, like, or maybe, you know, round 1's a draw, and then they come back in round 2 and he died, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, there are ways they can play with this, and we're even in breaking the trend somewhat in this issue. We're still kind of following the thing. It's like, okay, well, now I got, you know, I beat this guy, this guy. Now I got to face her. That's the next issue, and then, you know what I mean. So, again, like, something's going to have to give with the number of scions and the number of issues and what's remaining. But like, I definitely want to see them kind of mixing it up more in terms of their narrative approach, because it's still even in being different here, it's still feeling repetitive.
It does feel, though, like, I mean, with these kind of like limited, or I guess mini series or established arcs like this, where you know, you're not going to, you know, the story. I mean, I assume the story is not continuing into the Joe Kelly run, like it's a one and done kind of thing. You can build it into like a 3-act structure, and so like it feels to me like this issue started the second act, right? It's like the first act is Peter kind of getting used to this and learning the rules around all this stuff, and the second act is him starting to subvert those rules and take it into his own hands, right? So in that regard, like I think I'm beginning to see like how they structured this, and I'm hoping that it follows, like through on that idea of like breaking down like what has been established and showing us new facets of it in interesting ways. So we'll see how it all works out. But so far, I think the structure is like maybe a little like repetitive, but I can also see that it's starting to turn a corner. I hope.
Okay. So we alluded to it earlier, the supporting cast. I mean, like, again, like it does feel like these last two issues are kind of showing the stakes of Peter's role in this and how it's impacting these relationships, which is, again, what a Spider-Man book should do. I mean, what other highlights from the supporting cast did you kind of pull out from this comic?
Well, I appreciated, like not only are we seeing, the supporting cast, which like often in classic Spider-Man stories, they can feel very tangential to the main plot, or like they have their own kind of like secondary plots that come into the book, and it can feel, to use your phrase, like attached with a rivet gun. But I really like how Ireland has weaved in like the elements of the theme throughout these. You've got Randy, and he's suggesting that Peter establishes like a photo gallery of Spider-Man photos that show him as the underdog, which of course like reinforces the theme of the this contest or what have you, that Peter feels like he's the underdog and that it's a constant for him. And even like allowing Peter to have like a mini victory with Aunt May where he proves that he's not a complete flake and things like that. I do like how this book is allowing these like subplots, to advance. Even like stuff with Shay where she says you got to find these joyful moments in life, and we see him acting on that here, right? Like he shows up for Aunt May despite all of the chaos around him. It does kind of like poke a little bit of a hole in the tire of like, this is so all-consuming, this contest. I don't have time for anything. The pressure is so great, but I do still have the time to go and see everybody. Right. But, like, I don't think every story has to be a pressure cooker, and I think these moments fit in just fine. What do you think?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, it doesn't always have to be a pressure cooker. You just have to, again, establish kind of like, what's at stake here for Peter in terms of, I mean, like, I like the fact that, no, it's not necessarily all consuming, but even like while he's out and about, he first the little old man at the window, and it's like, is that the next Scion? You know what I mean? Like things like that. I like that. It may not be all consuming, but it's in Peter's head right now, and his kind of he's thinking constantly about how he's going to approach each thing, each challenge here, if you will. I did find interesting that like the way we kind of advanced the Peter Shay relationship here was more through a Shay and Aunt May scene. Like I don't know. There's a part of me that's like, oh, it's a nice scene, and May's going to bat for Peter, which is always nice. But then I'm kind of thinking to myself, but it's this, we haven't really done much to establish a rapport between May and Shay here. So like, is this a truly earned moment, or are we, like, is this one of those things? It's nice, but how.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it implies that they've met before, which suggests that there's been more dates with Shay that we haven't seen on the page, which is nice. Although I do find it really like strange because maybe I'm just going to bat. I'm standing the like Peter Shay thing, just because like every time she gets brought up, I feel like Peter de-emphasizes it, we're like, let's go to dinner, and Peter thinks in this issue like dinner is the last thing on my to-do list. It'd be one thing to be like, hey, I'm distracted, like I'm not sure that's going to work out, but to like list it as the last thing, seems kind of strange. And then like Shay's attitude with May is kind of like, is Peter always like this? And I just worry that like this book seems to be making up reasons to kind of like already run this thing off the road. I don't know if you're still reading Spectacular Spider-Man. I wish I wasn't, because I think that book is an absolute disaster. But like, there's a scene in that where Peter goes on like a date with the clone of Sally Averill, and Miles goes on a date with Kamala Khan, and like both of them are like trying to get with these other people, and he brings up that he's like kind of seeing someone in Shay, and it's like what is going on? Are we supposed to buy, like, because I completely buy that Peter will be into this relationship, but then the text kind of tells me it's like they're inadvertently writing the most charming relationship, and they're like, but we can't have this, like we finally found a decent alternative to MJ in this Shay person. I'm not saying that she has anywhere near the legacy of MJ, but like I'm actually buying into this, and then like there's these scenes that are just like, no, we can't have this. Like, do you pick up? Do you think the book is protesting a little too much? Like, maybe I'm overreading this stuff.
You might be in this regard. I mean, like, yes, I still am reading Spectacular Spider-Man, but like as far as I'm concerned, like that might as well be on like Earth 46 or something. Like it.
I mean, I wish it was. Like, it's such a weird book.
I mean, it really doesn't like jive with anything, like even the Miles book, or it just doesn't jive with anything right now. So it was just kind of wacky. But I guess I didn't take some of the throwaway lines here to be kind of in this issue specifically as like a put down of the relationship. I kind of just saw it as Peter being distracted by this thing, and you know, kind of maybe, if anything, resorting to old habits, which is like him kind of maybe depriving himself of his ability, you know, of his yearnings for normalcy in his relationships, because, well, you know, dinner's the last thing on my mind because I'm probably going to die tonight fighting a scion. You know what I mean? Like, so
that's fair. I guess I'm more like, I'm more frightful that they're like, well, we're going to use this to split these two up, when I'm like, I've seen that story. Like, you know, like I've seen Peter fail. And that, I get that that's like the theme of the book, but like, I think it's because I find Shay like a really intriguing and interesting relationship of the type we've never seen Peter engage in before, with someone who's actually mentally healthy. You know, and good for him, and challenging him to be a better person. Like, I just want to read that. Like, if only because like it suggests actual growth for Peter, which, like, you know, I'm desperate for. So, you know, I also find it weird because like at the New York Comic-Con panel that Joe Kelly was on, like people were asking him questions about like MJ and stuff like that, and kind of trollish ways. But he said specifically that this arc wouldn't really deal with Peter's love life, which is funny because it seems like such one of the core subplots of this story. So maybe it's because Justina Ireland is the one running with it.
I don't know. Or maybe Joe Kelly just thinks of Shay as like a niece. Or
like a sister.
I was trying to be different than a sister, but
my cousin. Well, he's got multiple.
My cousin,
sisters,
cousin Shay. You know, I love you like a cousin, Shay. Whatever you. You know, there are levels of things that I put stock in, and I would say con panels probably fall a few notches below solicitations, Dan. I know you eat them all up, and you know, you're ever at the conspiracy board waiting to put it all together, but like what Joe Kelly said in October doesn't really move the needle with me.
I wouldn't even have watched that panel if it didn't make the news because the MJ stand showed up and decided to make a big heyday about it. But anyway, that's for season 7 of our show to talk about. I did want to talk about, before we get to break, about like the kind of expanded rules and explanation of this contest that we seem to be getting here. I feel like we're learning new things all the time that are like increasingly vague, and that keeps me kind of at arm's length about really embracing the real stakes of this thing. I think specifically, like, Peter starts to question, like you said in the recap, like why he has to keep dying. And I found Doctor Strange's answer, as written by Justina here, really confusing. And I don't know if that's intentionally so or not. I mean, he's definitely being vague on purpose. But, like, the writing of this made it sound like we were supposed to get a conclusive answer out of this, and I don't feel any closer to it. But he's like, there's no way to stop the dying. But then he kind of equally says that the whole point is to not lose. And so I'm like, well, aren't those things related? Like, if he dies a bunch of times, isn't that how he loses? And it goes back to the end of issue 3 with the Scion just arbitrarily killing Peter. Like, the ramifications of choosing to do that mean that none of these rules matter, or, like, in any way. And that bums me out because, like, it was really clear to me. Like, you've got to beat 8 levels, and you've got 8 lives to do so, and the levels are going to get increasingly hard, and so you better be careful with those lives. And to break that up, to me, is really dumb because you establish something really clean. Like, why complicate it? So anyway, and then Doctor Strange elaborates that, like, the Covenant is really what holds together the casket, and in my brain it just started screaming Secret Scrolls to me, which I imagine probably was your Secret Scroll sense going off. What do you think about this kind of explanation from Strange? I mean, go ahead.
Like you said, Dan. I mean, there are elements of jazz to this story that are just kind of, I'm using another one of my Marxisms here and calling it jazz. I mean, it's just kind of flying fast and loose, and it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. Here comes the drum solo, here comes the trumpet. It doesn't all necessarily work and make harmonious music, but at the end of the day, it's got a beat and you can dance to it, I guess. I don't know if there's much to dissect here besides the fact that I think even with a storyteller that seems to really want to grasp the character here, there's just some general sloppiness to how the arc of this story is being unfurled. So
I don't know what would motivate Strange. My read on it is that Strange is being deliberately vague, and like, what would the intention be there to do so?
Because he's the Sorcerer Supreme, so he's got to, well, you know what I mean?
Well,
yeah,
he's not.
But
yeah.
He's still at his core.
Any other time you
could
right,
take
Mark.
the title away from him, but he still is who he is.
Sure, just a smug
exactly.
asshole. I agree.
Yeah. So anyway.
Well, speaking of smug assholery, why don't you tell the listeners where they can talk to us some more?
Yeah, if you want more smugness, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, oh boy, I feel like I got to get the soapbox out here. What's been going on in the Slack this week?
Well, speaking of smug and self-congratulatory, I wanted to talk about something from the back of this comic.
Oh, my God. It's another letter dissection from Dan Gabazin. This is the new letter segment where Dan goes into the letters page of Amazing Spider-Man. Keep going, Dan.
Look, I have to point out this letter because I think there's a letter in the back of this issue that I think is maybe the worst letter I've ever read in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man.
Dan, I beg you to summarize the letter and not read the whole letter.
Okay, I will not read the whole thing. But basically, a person named MC, and this is, again, I imagine MC is like a high school kid writing in to this thing. But, like, I want to use this as an example to say, like, don't do this. Like, this is not how you write a letter, and this is not how you engage in criticism. And basically the letter just writes in to be like, the Zeb Wells run is so bad, I could write it. You should let me write it. Like, I'm an amateur. I've written Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction. Yeah. And you should let me write it, but also you should let me write it and remove all of the perceived limitations that all of the other creators have had so I can write the ultimate Spider-Man story. And I just found this so infuriating for a number of reasons. One, it is like highly delusional, you know, like people work up their whole careers in the industry to get to write something like Amazing Spider-Man. Like, I don't think this person actually thought like Nick Lowe would respond and be like, here's the title to Amazing Spider-Man. But, like, don't write that letter in. Like, come in with, like, actual criticism rather than being like, I could do a better job. Which, granted, I think everybody on planet Earth has engaged with media of some kind and thought, this is so stupid, I could do a better job. But the better thing to ask is, like, anybody that writes something bad, like, the better question to ask is, like, what are the things that caused it to be bad? Because everybody thinks they're doing something good, or they're going to do the best they can to make it good, despite the limitations, you know, whether it's Hollywood and they give you a week to write a script, or the script is going, or the movie's going to production before the script is done. Nobody sets out to do something bad, right? Everyone, like, you know, is going to give it their best, right? But for this person to write that in and then also include the caveat of like, hey, if you were to let me write this book, please don't, like, let me retcon anything. Like, let me not have to write events. And the next question anybody should ask themselves, and I think it's something we should always be thinking about, Mark, is like, well, you know, of course this person has to juggle, like the person writing this book has to juggle all these things, and that might be the reason it's falling apart, you know? So anyway, I just found this really lazy, and I want to, like, say to people, like, do better than this, you know, like, extend to people the kindness that everyone is trying their best, and that there may or may not be things that they have to deal with that you don't know about, like, that are causing things to be bad. We've had how many writers on this title, Mark, in the past 10 years that haven't been able to make Amazing Spider-Man really work, that are all, like, top-tier creators in their field? Maybe there's something else going on that it won't work. What do you think about that, Mark?
What I will say is, for the record, folks, I had to shorten my recap for this episode because, you know, and instead we're gonna spend 10 minutes talking about obnoxious fan letter. I'm kidding. I willingly shortened my recap. Look, Dan, I'm gonna be not devil's advocate here because this letter is abhorrent. But, like, I'm also, like, I'm calling a little bit of BS on Marvel for publishing it because I'm saying here, like, to me, stuff like this is, and I've seen the Spider Office do this in other, I mean, this is far and away the most insane version of this that we've seen, but, like, I think there is legitimate merited criticism of this book and this run and even some of the things that are mentioned here in terms of the crossovers and the retcons and all that kind of stuff. I think there are warranted complaints that can be made, but when something like this gets highlighted by those in charge and basically dignified by Marvel, it's also kind of like putting a cudgel against legitimate criticism because it's being like, you see, this is what we have to deal with. And I don't like that. I think like just throw this letter in the trash and don't dignify it because you're not, like, I'm sure I'm sure they're getting letters like this all the time because this is the society we live in. We have, social media has created zero filters in how people like to engage with creators and celebrities and everything else. So, I mean, heck, the main proprietor of social media does it to random people and has zero filter or boundaries with people. So this is the world we live in right now. But like, I feel like dignifying this, in this fashion, and highlighting this letter over potentially letters that are crafted with more thought and care, like to me, it's a backwards way of invalidating actual criticism. And if they're not getting letters that are written with thought and care, besides from you, Dan, then
right, they published my letter just a few issues ago.
Then like, let's just get rid of the letters page, because this is a stupid exercise here. Like, nobody benefited from that letter, except for, basically folks getting on a soapbox, be like, well, don't do this. Like, this is bad. This is an important. Of course, this is an important way to do criticism. We shouldn't have to be explaining that. And I think, like, the fact that we're spending our podcast time dissecting it is what Marvel wants to kind of diffract from its critics. So I'm not trying to get on your case for bringing it up.
I think that's fair.
I think, like, it's insane to me that this was written, and it was insane to me that it was published, and it was insane to me that Nick Lowe responded to it. So, like, I think it's a shame on everybody. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair, and I think I would like. I think I mostly agree with you, and I think I would 100% agree with you if they didn't publish my letter a few issues ago, which I thought had real criticism. But the thing that undermines that is they didn't respond to my letter in any real way. Right. Like he responded more seriously to this letter than to my letter. I find that really annoying, although I do think his response was good. And I think the good that could come from this is that people that have these kind of thoughts can see that there is actually a process, for like, hey, how are people chosen to write this book? But I don't know, maybe I'm asking too much, and but I really appreciate your point of view on this, and I don't mean to take this much time on it, except that I see this kind of stuff, like, this is all Spider-Man Reddit is this kind of comment, and that's all Twitter became, is this kind of comment. And so, like, I don't know, I kind of think there is a place for saying, like, hey, if you really think you could do better, then, like, go make comics. Like, I do think that there is, that might be a lazy response, but I do think it is honest at the very least. Like, we're trying our best to make good comics, and if you can make good comics, we'll invite you into the fold.
Maybe I also come at this with the unique perspective Ann is, and I have never been shy about saying the fact that I have zero desires or machinations to ever want to write comics, period. Like, it's not, I like reading comics. I like criticizing comics. I don't necessarily need to write comics. So, and
I only say that because that was the avenue that this letter writer took, which is I write comics.
But that's why, like, to me, like, whether it's in a letter, on Reddit, on Twitter, aka both platforms that I'm not on anymore because of this kind of discourse, frankly, like, it's, to me, like, this is unproductive conversation. I can do this better. Well, if you can do it better, then do it better.
Fair enough.
I'm past dignifying it, I guess. That's my bottom line, like.
This is all to say, this has been an ad for the Amazing Spider Slack, where actually we had a lot of similar conversations about this letter in the Slack, of people kind of, talking about the very thing that we're talking about, the merits of printing something like this. But if you like to join in on that conversation, and if you don't want to have that conversation, guess what? You can just opt out of it in the Slack and talk about anything else. So maybe that's where you'll find Mark. But at the very least, come join the Slack. We'd love to see you in there. There's a link in the description to this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute. Now let's get back to the proper body of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 64, although I find the letters pages sometimes just as entertaining as the actual comic itself. Mark, you wouldn't know unless I fill you in. Let's talk about the fight with Calyx, the inevitability of pain. Mark, what do you think of this fight? I guess on its own and as like kind of like the latest in a series of battles.
So again, I maybe I'm going to be a little contrary here. I mean, we talked earlier about like certainly some of the aspects of this encounter that I thought were well developed. I mean, like I think from a Peter development standpoint, this was very good. I like the fact that we saw some growth and progress from Peter and how he's approaching this, and there were good jokes here, and like just good witty banter. Dry drawl humor is in spades here, but like I feel like Calyx as a foe here is kind of a pushover. I mean, like he's so overconfident that, I mean, he really gets dispatched kind of easily. I guess I never saw the threat come through. I mean, like I was happy that Peter didn't die. Don't get me wrong. And like I said, we're running out of issues where Peter can die to keep this story going. So like I'm glad that they used it on one. But like I was kind of, I don't know. I also kind of felt almost a little let down by the threat that Calyx presented here. I mean, am I overreading this here?
No, I don't think so. This was the major kind of demerit for me for this issue is I just didn't get into this battle in the way that I have the previous ones. I think the solution to it is very clever. Like,
yes.
Again, I mentioned I like the payoff of him, tricking him, but I never really felt the threat of this character. And maybe he's not meant to be a physical powerhouse, and that would have felt repetitive. But him kind of just sending his dogs off and then not really taking advantage of that opening, to me, like I never felt the stakes were really against Peter. I mean, I don't like seeing random citizens have their souls sucked out or what have you. My feeling is there was just not enough pages to really expand this much more. Right. Like these issues, given the structure of them, feel very packed. Like we don't really see Phil Coulson in the way we did in issue 1, and the death thing seems underplayed, in issue 3. Like, I just think they seem like they're overpacked, and I think choosing to focus on Peter stuff is what I would rather have than more brouhaha, I'm the ultimate monster kind of thing. But, like, in terms of that balance I talked about before, I do think the thing that got the short end of the stick is Calyx himself being a threat. I get that he's cocky, and that's built into the character, and that's his big flaw. And it's going to be set up as an opposite to his sister, who I imagine is going to show up next issue and cause all kinds of damage to Spider-Man. But this guy felt like such a non-entity in regard to this ongoing series of battles.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I agree with you in terms of like, maybe we spend more time with other character moments or whatever, but like, to kind of what I was saying earlier in terms of the form and the format of these books, maybe this is an instance where you do get a cliffhanger where it's like, like he poses more of a challenge, but like, doesn't kill him necessarily. But then, we come back in the next issue and Peter outsmarts him. And then that brings us into the Syra fight. You know what I mean? Like I like there are ways you can kind of play around with it and create some drama without necessarily doing it the way they did here, which was just kind of be like, all right, well, this is because like, I mean, again, I'm doing math and trying to predict here. And like, I'm starting to think that maybe like, not to get in the prediction business, but like I wonder if like Peter is going to lose multiple lives in a fight now or something, you know what I mean, to kind of make up for, you know, like it just kind of seems to be the Parker luck, if you will. He survived one without dying, so now he's going to die twice or three times or whatever, and like so I don't know. Like I think like we could have set it up in a way where then when we pay it off in that direction, again, it kind of means more because it was like, oh wow, Peter got, you know, stole victory from the jaws of defeat, but now he's really down on his luck because he's down to 2 reeds or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I wholly expect that that's going to happen. There's no way that he doesn't like exist for several issues with only one life remaining and have to squeak it out. I mean, that to me is a Spider-Man story, and or him outright losing all 8 and finding a way to come back. I mean, we've seen that story, maybe not framed in that way,
right,
a bunch of times before. I could see an issue like this ending with him sending his dogs out into the street and the threat being, oh no, all these civilians are going to start dying, and the final image is the dogs like
descending,
you know, Rick Moranis style, you know, sucking on the faces of these people or whatever. Yeah.
When they ask if you're a god, you say yes.
Yes, I am the keymaster. Yeah. What do you think of Gleb Melnikov in this issue? I mean, it's kind of our second issue with him. Do you feel like it was comparable to what came before?
I mean, it's comparable. I mean, again, I don't find the art to be terribly memorable here, but it's clean and fine. You know what I mean? Like, I guess there's nothing that really like pops for me. I mean, but like you know, the art moves. It tells the story. I don't know. Am I being too blasé in my criticism of it, or?
No, I actually think that that's pretty on the nose. Like I find a lot of his strengths in that. To me, at least, it seems to me like he's clearly aping the style of JRJR on this book, and along with that comes like a lot of the cleanliness of JRJR's storytelling. But you can see what elevates a Ramita over something like
right.
this. I feel like there's a lot of like empty, unused space in these layouts. And again, it's clean. It's never cluttered, but like it's almost too uncluttered. Like there's several pages where there's a lot of like white negative space that Peter is like breaking into. And there's that big splashy page where he's just beating Calyx like really hard, but I don't feel any of the like, I mean, there's some like motion stuff that makes it look cool, but like a lot of the posings of Peter look like he's floating in like mid-air, and they're just kind of stock poses that Peter's in rather than like telling a narrative. Like this is going to be a completely unfair comparison, but I think about like a similar moment from ASM 500 where JRJR has to depict Spider-Man fighting through his entire like history up to Amazing Spider-Man 500 and the Rogues Gallery, and that's an amazingly like 5 days were taken to draw that double page spread kind of moment, you know. But and I imagine it didn't take JRJR 5 days to do it, but you feel every punch on that over cluttered page, and it's still clean. Yeah. And this one felt like to quote JRJR from our podcast again, like it felt like Deadline style was ruling the day here. Yeah. This one felt more rushed than the previous issue in that it wasn't as inventive, and there was a lot of like corner cutting stuff to get this one in.
Okay, that's fair. Do you want to give this thing a grade?
Yeah, I'm giving this one a B-.
Now you went through all that, and you gave it a B-. I was expecting a B+ from you. I'm a B- also. Like here I am thinking I'm being harder on this book, and I'm just like, oh, you know, like Dan, calm yourself. And I know you weren't going to go A+ with it, but I thought you were going to be on the higher end of B here, and I'm thinking to myself, oh god, he's going to think I'm like Mr. Grumpy for B- here. You just like, you know, Dan, you are full of surprises. So yeah, B-.
Yeah. I mean, look, here's the deal. Like, I think I gave the last issue a B. Yeah. I didn't think this was as good as the last issue.
No, it wasn't. It was good, better than the first two, but yeah, it wasn't as good. So, all right, look at you.
I mean, when we get into A territory, Mark, that's an issue I would give anyone. Like
that's an issue you write into the letters page about, right?
absolutely, yeah. And granted, I think I am going to write into the letters page to commend Justina Ireland.
Okay.
Just
All
because,
right, yes.
I think that's worth commending.
Yes.
Like this is a voice that needs to be given more than these 4 issues.
Absolutely.
Like, and I honestly think it's a shame we're not getting more, because if this is her working on someone else's plot, like maybe she's not Dan Slott, maybe she's not like the idea person,
Right.
you know, that's just like rolling them out. Which, okay, great, you kind of need a little bit of that, but I would definitely read 40 issues of a story written with these characters.
Right. Well, I mean, hopefully at the very least she gets like either some minis or maybe another ongoing, like, you know, side book from the office or something, because like you said, she should, you know, get to tell this story. And if she's not necessarily, you know, an idea idea person like Dan Slott or like a Steve Orlando or something like that, like, you know, let her tell some stories in other ways. I don't know. I agree. We should hear more from her. So write that letter, Dan. I'll even let you read the whole thing on air.
Yeah, when it inevitably gets printed. I am the inevitability of letters being printed, Mark. I am the final scion. I will say, if people liked Justina Ireland on this book, another issue that she wrote just dropped on Marvel Unlimited. She wrote a like Deathlock 30th anniversary issue, and I'm no fan or like I'm not particularly knowledgeable about Deathlock.
Maximum Carnage.
But I read it. Yeah, I read it because Justina Ireland wrote it, and it was really fun. And I was like, okay, this person is like a really solid writer. I'm not just giving it my ASM like glow
All
up.
right.
So anyway,
All right. You want me to take them home, Dan?
I do in fact want you to take it home.
Well,
Mark.
good, because it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. So thank you to everyone who already supports us and our work.
If you value Smart's comics criticism and historical analysis, as well as letter page reviews, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on this show is admittedly niche. Still, we feel that we offer valuable commentary and model fair methods of criticism for a character and medium that rarely receives the kind of consideration we believe it deserves. So, if that is valuable to you, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon.
Mark, I'm getting your letters of complaint about my analysis about letters. Look, I'll stop doing it, but if there's enough support for it, we're bringing in a whole new Patreon series called Dan Dissects the Spider Mail.
800 Letters to Santa Claus by Dan Gavazin. Keep going.
Yes, Virginia, there is a Spider Mail. So, Mark, until Spider-Man casts the electrifying energies of Pikachu spell, what's our motto?
With great with great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.
Is there a spider-based Pokemon?
I wouldn't know. That's a millennial thing, Pokemon. I definitely came in too late to that thing.
Oh my goodness, what are you gonna do now that it's not a Gen Xer writing this title?